The small, idyllic town of Perugia, nestled in the heart of Italy, is a place where life moves slowly. Known for its historic architecture and vibrant student population, it was considered a haven of safety and culture. But in the early hours of November 2nd, 2007, that peace was shattered forever. Inside a quaint stone cottage on Via della Pergola, an eerie silence loomed. The house was home to a group of international students, including 21-year-old Meredith Kercher, a British exchange student who had come to Perugia to embrace new experiences. Her housemate, Amanda Knox, a young woman from Seattle, shared the home along with two Italian women who were away that weekend. The events that would unfold here would not only grip Italy but capture the world's attention for years. It began with a troubling series of events. Amanda Knox returned to the house that morning to find things unsettlingly out of place. The front door was ajar, a window in one of the rooms had been smashed, and there were small but chilling signs that something was terribly wrong. The bathroom sink was streaked with blood. On the bath mat, a bloody footprint seemed to scream for answers. Yet Amanda and her boyfriend, Rafael Solicito, hesitated to raise the alarm until one crucial discovery. The door to Meredith's room was locked. As concern mounted, the police were called. When officers arrived and forced the door open, they were met with a grisly scene that would haunt them. Meredith was found lying partially clothed on the floor, her throat savagely slashed. Blood stained the walls and floor, telling a silent story of a struggle, desperation, and violence. Meredith had been a vibrant and promising young woman, described by friends and family as kind, intelligent, and full of life. She had spent the evening with friends before returning home. What had transpired in the hours that followed was unfathomable. The crime scene was puzzling and chaotic. Signs of a break-in, an unlocked door, and scattered belongings pointed to an intruder. But seasoned investigators noted inconsistencies. Why was the glass from the smashed window on top of the belongings? And why did it seem as though the break-in had been staged? The small cottage became a hive of activity as forensic teams meticulously combed through the house for clues. Meredith's murder rocked the local community, but the shock waves would soon ripple far beyond the borders of Perugia. Who would do this to a young woman full of promise, and why? As the sun set over Perugia, the picturesque town transformed into the epicenter of one of the most perplexing murder cases of the 21st century. The question lingered: was the culprit a stranger, or was the answer closer than anyone dared to imagine? The final day of Meredith Kercher's life began like any other in the charming town of Perugia. Friends would later recount that she seemed happy and relaxed, her usual warm and kind self. A diligent student and a loyal friend, Meredith had settled comfortably into her routine abroad, embracing the experience of living in a foreign country. That evening, Meredith attended a small gathering at the home of a few friends, fellow students she trusted and enjoyed spending time with. They laughed, shared stories, and discussed plans for the coming days. Witnesses would later confirm that Meredith left the gathering at around 9 o'clock, a time when the streets of Perugia still buzzed with life. The journey back to Via della Pergola was a familiar one, but darkness had fallen and the narrow streets felt unusually quiet. As she walked, Meredith may have sensed nothing amiss, or perhaps, somewhere in the distance, someone was already watching her. At her cottage, Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito were reportedly spending the evening together. Meredith's two other housemates were still out of town. The house was unusually empty, casting an eerie silence over the otherwise lively home. Meredith entered through the front door, locking it behind her. What she did in those moments remains speculative. Did she change into her comfortable clothes, prepare for bed, or check her phone for messages? The answers may forever be lost in time. The questions that haunt investigators and the public alike are: did Meredith encounter someone she knew that night? Was the killer waiting inside the house, or did they gain entry later? What we do know is chilling. Evidence suggests that Meredith's last moments were filled with unimaginable terror. The state of the crime scene indicated a struggle, a desperate fight for her life. Her friends and family would later describe her as cautious and level-headed. It seemed unlikely that she would willingly let a stranger into her home. So, who could have crossed that threshold, and why? These final hours of her life hold the key to understanding the events that followed. Somewhere in the timeline of her last known movements lies a clue, something that could unravel the mystery. But for now, the darkness surrounding her final walk home grows even deeper. In the immediate aftermath of Meredith Kercher's brutal murder, investigators turned their attention to those closest to her. Among them was her American roommate, Amanda Knox. At just 20 years old, Amanda had arrived in Perugia brimming with enthusiasm, ready to embrace the freedom of living abroad. Her carefree demeanor and adventurous spirit quickly made her a standout personality in the close-knit student community. But after the discovery of Meredith's body, her actions began to raise eyebrows. Amanda and her boyfriend, Rafael Solicito, were at the cottage on the morning Meredith's body was found. It was Amanda who first noticed strange details: the open front door, the smashed window, and the blood in the bathroom. Yet, instead of immediate panic, Amanda's response seemed unusually calm. She claimed to have taken a shower despite seeing blood-streaked surfaces, a choice that baffled many. As the investigation progressed, Amanda's behavior became a focal point. Witnesses described her as detached, even playful, in the hours after Meredith's death. A now infamous moment captured by reporters showed Amanda and Raphael kissing outside the crime scene, their apparent lack of distress striking an odd chord. Investigators began to question whether this was the reaction of a grieving friend or something else entirely. Under the intense glare of police scrutiny, Amanda's personality seemed to shift. During interviews, she was at times cooperative, offering details about the house, her routine, and her relationship with Meredith. Yet she also exhibited signs of stress, alternating between confusion and composure. Was this the behavior of a young woman overwhelmed by tragedy, or were there deeper motivations at play? Amanda's recounting of events became another source of suspicion. At first, she claimed that she had spent the entire evening at Raphael's apartment, but as investigators pressed her, her story began to change. She implicated Patrick Lumumba, her boss at a local bar, claiming he had been at the house with Meredith that night. Her sudden accusation shocked authorities and cast doubt on her credibility. It wasn't just Amanda's statements, but also her demeanor during interrogations that caught attention. She was seen doing yoga stretches, joking with officers, and at one point performing a cartwheel in the police station. To investigators and the media, this behavior seemed wildly inappropriate given the gravity of the situation. Public opinion soon began to shift. Amanda Knox was no longer just a witness or a friend of the victim. She was becoming a suspect. Questions lingered. Was Amanda's odd behavior a coping mechanism for shock and fear, or did it reveal a darker truth? Did her changing story indicate confusion, or was it a sign of deception? The transformation from grieving roommate to potential suspect was swift, but it wasn't without controversy. Amanda's carefree attitude, cultural differences, and youthful naivete may have painted her in a certain light. But as the investigation moved forward, more damning questions about her involvement began to emerge, pulling her further into the center of this unfolding mystery. Rafael Solicito, a quiet 23-year-old Italian student with a love for computer science, found himself pulled into the storm surrounding Meredith Kercher's murder almost immediately. A reserved and intellectual young man, Raphael had been dating Amanda Knox for only a few weeks when the tragedy occurred. But what should have been a budding romance quickly became entangled in one of the most scrutinized criminal cases of the decade. The night of the murder, Amanda and Raphael claimed they were together at his apartment, watching movies, browsing the internet, and later falling asleep. Their story seemed straightforward, but as investigators began to probe deeper, cracks began to form in their narrative. What initially appeared to be a solid alibi began to unravel under pressure. Police questioned Raphael repeatedly, asking for specifics about their activities that night. At first, he supported Amanda's claim that they had been together the entire evening, but inconsistencies soon emerged. Raphael admitted he couldn't be certain of Amanda's whereabouts for part of the evening, suggesting she may have left his apartment briefly. This shift in his story raised red flags for investigators who now began to doubt the reliability of both their accounts. Adding to the suspicion were anomalies in Raphael's behavior. Known to be methodical and logical, his responses during interrogation sometimes lacked clarity and his demeanor appeared strained. Was he protecting Amanda, or was he concealing something more sinister? The once simple story of a quiet night together grew murkier with every question. Forensic evidence further complicated Raphael's position. A kitchen knife, later suggested by prosecutors to be the murder weapon, was seized from his apartment. While DNA evidence on the knife would later become a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, its significance remained unclear in these early stages. Raphael's connection to the crime seemed tenuous at first, but as the investigation progressed, his relationship with Amanda made him a prime suspect. Under mounting pressure, Raphael and Amanda's stories began to diverge. The image of a supportive boyfriend standing by Amanda began to falter as his statements became less aligned with hers. This shift painted a troubling picture for investigators. Were the two protecting each other, or was one trying to distance themselves from the other? Raphael's reserved nature stood in stark contrast to Amanda's outgoing personality, making him a more enigmatic figure in the case. While Amanda's behavior captured headlines, Raphael's role in the unfolding drama quietly deepened. As investigators pieced together the events of that night, they began to wonder, was Raphael a bystander caught in a whirlwind of circumstance, or was he an accomplice to something far darker? The scrutiny on Raphael's alibi grew relentless, and every word he spoke seemed to cast more doubt than clarity. The cracks in their narrative left investigators with a crucial question. If Amanda and Raphael's accounts couldn't fully align, could either of them be trusted at all? The quiet halls of the Perugia police station buzzed with intensity as Amanda Knox was brought in for another round of questioning. It was the fifth day of the investigation, and frustration was mounting. Detectives believed they were running out of time to uncover the truth. In their eyes, Amanda's calm demeanor and inconsistent statements were reason enough to press harder. They hoped this interrogation would finally crack the case wide open. The hours ticked by as Amanda sat under glaring lights, surrounded by officers who demanded answers. She later described the session as chaotic and intimidating. The questioning was relentless, with investigators accusing her of lying, shouting that she knew more than she was saying. Language barriers only heightened the tension, as Amanda's limited Italian left her struggling to fully understand what was being said, let alone defend herself. Then came the turning point. Under immense pressure, Amanda's story shifted dramatically. She claimed to have been in the cottage on the night of Meredith's murder and implicated Patrick Lumumba, her boss at a local bar. According to Amanda, Patrick had been at the house that night with Meredith. She described hearing Meredith's screams from another room, but claimed she was too afraid to intervene. The sudden accusation stunned investigators. It was a revelation that promised to unlock the mystery of what had happened to Meredith. But Amanda's statement raised as many questions as it answered. Why had she not mentioned Patrick before? And why did her account contradict the physical evidence, which suggested she had not been in the house at the time of the murder? Amanda later recanted this version of events, claiming her confession had been coerced. She said the interrogation left her exhausted and confused, and that police had planted the idea of Patrick's involvement. Still, the damage was done. Amanda's credibility was now in question, and Patrick Lumumba was about to face the full weight of these allegations. The arrest of Patrick Lumumba was swift and decisive. Within hours of Amanda's statement, police had him in custody. Patrick, a Congolese bar owner who had employed Amanda part-time, was dragged into the unfolding nightmare. For the police, Amanda's testimony was enough to connect him to the crime, and his life was turned upside down in an instant. But Patrick's shock turned to fury as he proclaimed his innocence. He provided an alibi that was not only airtight, but quickly verifiable. He had been at his bar the entire evening of Meredith's murder, surrounded by customers and staff. Witnesses came forward to confirm his whereabouts, and phone records corroborated his claim. Within 2 weeks, Patrick was released, his name cleared. The false accusation had devastating consequences. Patrick described feeling betrayed and humiliated both by the accusations and the public spectacle that followed. His arrest raised serious concerns about Amanda's reliability as a witness. Why had she pointed the finger at an innocent man? Was it an act of desperation, a deliberate lie, or the result of police coercion, as she later claimed? Patrick's release left investigators scrambling to refocus their efforts. Amanda's statement, once seen as a breakthrough, was now viewed with suspicion. If she could falsely accuse her employer, what else might she be hiding? Meanwhile, the press seized on the drama, portraying Amanda as a manipulative figure who had no qualms about dragging others into her mess. Patrick's exoneration was a turning point in the case. It deepened the mystery surrounding Meredith's death and left investigators with more questions than answers. If Patrick wasn't involved, who was? And why had Amanda implicated him in the first place? This misstep by the police and Amanda's faltering credibility would become a pivotal moment in the narrative, a moment that cast a long shadow over the investigation and hinted at the chaos yet to come. Amid the chaos of the investigation, a new name emerged, Rudy Gedd. A young man from Ivory Coast with a troubled past, Rudy had lived in Perugia and was known to frequent the area around the cottage. He was no stranger to police, having been involved in petty crimes and break-ins. But it was his DNA, found on Meredith Kercher's body, that thrust him into the center of the investigation. Unlike Amanda and Raphael, Rudy fled Italy soon after Meredith's murder. He was arrested weeks later in Germany, where he had been caught riding a train without a ticket. His sudden disappearance and his DNA at the scene made him a prime suspect. Yet, Rudy's version of events raised more questions than answers. Rudy admitted to being at the cottage the night Meredith was killed, but claimed he was there with her consent. According to him, they had been intimate before an unidentified intruder broke in and attacked her. Rudy said he heard Meredith scream, but fled in fear rather than intervene. His story painted him as a witness rather than a participant, a claim that many found implausible. Forensic evidence against Rudy was far more conclusive than that against Amanda or Raphael. His fingerprints, palm prints, and DNA were all present at the crime scene, making his involvement undeniable. But was he the sole perpetrator, or had others been involved? The introduction of Rudy Gedd changed the trajectory of the case. While prosecutors saw him as part of a trio, others believed he acted alone. The clash between these interpretations set the stage for one of the most controversial trials in modern history. Section 9. The prosecution's theory. With Amanda Knox, Raphael Solicito, and Rudy Gedd now in the spotlight, prosecutors constructed a chilling narrative. In their version of events, Meredith's murder was the result of a violent, jealousy-fueled attack. They argued that Amanda, emboldened by drugs and resentment toward Meredith, had orchestrated the killing. Raphael, besotted with Amanda, and Rudy, seeking thrills, had joined her in the crime. According to the prosecution, the three suspects forced their way into Meredith's room, initiating a nightmarish sequence of events. They claimed Amanda held a deep-seated jealousy of Meredith, fueled by cultural clashes and personality differences. This tension, they argued, exploded into violence when Meredith resisted their advances. To support their theory, prosecutors leaned heavily on the forensic evidence: the knife, the bra clasp, and the traces of DNA. They also pointed to Amanda's erratic behavior, Raphael's inconsistent alibi, and Rudy's presence at the scene. Together, these elements formed a picture of collusion and savagery. Yet, the theory was far from airtight. Critics argued that it relied more on conjecture than solid proof. The lack of motive, the absence of clear forensic links between Amanda and the crime scene, and Roddy's history of breaking into homes suggested alternative possibilities. The prosecution's version was designed to shock, but how plausible was it? Could three individuals from such different backgrounds have come together to commit such a horrific crime, or was this a case of overreach by authorities desperate for answers? As the trial approached, these questions loomed large, and the court would become a battleground for opposing interpretations of the evidence. Viewers are invited to weigh the plausibility of this chilling theory. Was it the truth or a narrative built to fit a flawed investigation? As the trial loomed, Amanda Knox's defense team launched a fierce counterattack against the prosecution's narrative. They argued that the case against Amanda and Raphael was riddled with inconsistencies, procedural missteps, and a complete absence of motive. Could these two young people really have committed such a heinous crime, or were they caught in a perfect storm of circumstantial evidence and public hysteria? One of the defense's key arguments was the lack of reliable forensic evidence tying Amanda to the crime scene. While the prosecution pointed to a knife from Raphael's kitchen and Amanda's DNA on its handle, the defense countered that the DNA on the blade, supposedly Meredith's, was so minuscule it could not be definitively linked to her. They also noted that the bra clasp, another crucial piece of evidence, had been collected weeks after the crime, raising the possibility of contamination. Amanda's defense team also highlighted the chaotic and unorthodox nature of her interrogation. They argued that police had coerced her into implicating Patrick Lumumba, exploiting her confusion and language barriers. This false accusation, they claimed, was a result of pressure, not guilt. The defense further pointed to Amanda's age and cultural background. A 20-year-old American woman, she had been thrust into an unfamiliar legal system and an unrelenting media spotlight. Her behavior, often cited as suspicious, could just as easily be interpreted as the awkward, confused reactions of a young woman overwhelmed by trauma and fear. Finally, the defense questioned the prosecution's theory of the crime. Where was the motive? They argued that there was no evidence of animosity between Amanda and Meredith, and no reason for Raphael to be involved at all. Was this truly a conspiracy, or was the prosecution building a narrative to fit preconceived notions about Amanda? While the legal teams battled in court, another trial was unfolding in the court of public opinion. From the moment Amanda Knox was named a suspect, the media latched onto her story with ferocity. Dubbed Foxy Knoxy by tabloids, Amanda became a figure of fascination and revulsion, her every action and word dissected under the glare of headlines. Sensational stories painted Amanda as a femme fatale, a sexually promiscuous and manipulative young woman who led Raphael and Roddy into a night of depravity. These narratives, fueled by cultural stereotypes, transformed Amanda from a grieving roommate into a villain in the public eye. Images of Amanda and Raphael kissing outside the crime scene were splashed across newspapers, their apparent lack of grief interpreted as callousness. Amanda's playful demeanor during police questioning and her candid diary entries were twisted into evidence of a cold, calculating nature. The media frenzy was not confined to Italy. International outlets, especially in the United States and the United Kingdom, amplified the story, turning it into a global spectacle. The British press, in particular, focused on Meredith Kercher, portraying her as the innocent victim of Amanda's jealousy and cruelty. This relentless coverage had profound consequences. Public opinion was shaped long before Amanda and Raphael entered the courtroom, and even jurors were not immune to the pervasive narratives. The question loomed, could Amanda receive a fair trial in the face of such overwhelming media bias? In a packed courtroom in Perugia, Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito faced their first trial. The prosecution laid out its case with dramatic flair, presenting the forensic evidence, Amanda's changing statements, and their theory of a jealousy-driven crime. They portrayed Amanda as the mastermind, Raphael as her infatuated accomplice, and Roddy as a willing participant. But the defense fought back, dissecting each piece of evidence with precision. They challenged the reliability of the DNA findings, calling expert witnesses to testify about contamination and mishandling. They pointed to Rudy's criminal history and his DNA on Meredith's body, arguing that he was the sole perpetrator. The trial was a spectacle, with every detail scrutinized by the press and the public. Amanda herself took the stand, insisting on her innocence and describing the emotional toll the case had taken on her. Her testimony was both a plea for understanding and a defense against the avalanche of accusations. The jury's task was daunting. The evidence was complex, the narratives conflicting, and the stakes monumental. As deliberations began, the world held its breath. Would Amanda and Raphael be found guilty of a crime they insisted they did not commit, or would the jury see through the prosecution's case? The verdict hung in the balance, and with it the fate of two young lives. For Meredith Kercher's family, justice remained elusive, and for Amanda and Raphael, the courtroom was only the beginning of their battle for freedom. After months of testimony, arguments, and intense media scrutiny, the jury in Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito's trial reached their decision. On a cold December evening, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Spectators, reporters, and the families of both Meredith Kercher and the accused awaited the announcement. The verdict was devastating for Amanda and Raphael, guilty. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years in prison, while Raphael received 25. The decision sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Tears streamed down Amanda's face as her parents looked on in despair. For Meredith's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but also deepened the tragedy of losing their daughter. Despite the seeming finality of the decision, doubts about the trial began surfacing almost immediately. Legal experts and journalists questioned the strength of the evidence, the role of media sensationalism, and the potential bias of investigators. The case against Amanda and Raphael, many argued, had relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and a controversial narrative crafted by the prosecution. Could the jury have been swayed by the relentless media portrayal of Amanda as Foxy Noxy? Did the forensic evidence truly hold up under scrutiny, or had the investigation been flawed from the start? These questions would linger long after the guilty verdict was delivered. Amanda and Raphael's defense teams wasted no time in filing an appeal, determined to challenge the verdict that had upended their lives. The appellate trial began in the spring, and with it came a renewed examination of the evidence that had been central to their convictions. At the heart of the appeals was the DNA evidence, the knife, and the bra clasp. Independent forensic experts testified that the DNA on the knife blade was so minimal it could not reliably be linked to Meredith Kercher. Furthermore, the DNA on the bra clasp, purportedly belonging to Raphael, was reanalyzed. Experts argued that the clasp, which had been left at the crime scene for weeks, was highly susceptible to contamination. The defense also highlighted procedural flaws in the investigation. They pointed out that police had mishandled evidence, failed to follow proper forensic protocols, and relied too heavily on a narrative rather than facts. The supposed motive, a jealousy-fueled attack, was also called into question. Why would Amanda, with no history of violence or animosity toward Meredith, commit such a brutal act? As the appeal progressed, the cracks in the prosecution's case widened. Public opinion began to shift, with many now viewing Amanda and Raphael as victims of a flawed legal system and a media frenzy that had distorted the truth. In a dramatic twist, the appellate court overturned the convictions of Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito. After spending 4 years in prison, they were declared innocent of Meredith's murder due to insufficient evidence. The courtroom erupted with emotion, relief, and elation for Amanda and Raphael, heartbreak and disbelief for Meredith's family. Amanda and Raphael walked free, but their release did little to resolve the case. The Kercher family, still grieving the loss of their daughter, struggled to accept the decision. Prosecutors vowed to appeal the acquittal, refusing to let the case rest. The question of who was truly responsible for Meredith's death remained unanswered, leaving a cloud of uncertainty over the proceedings. For Amanda, returning to her home in Seattle was bittersweet. She was free, but her life had been forever altered. The media continued to hound her, and debates about her innocence raged on. Similarly, Raphael tried to rebuild his life in Italy, but the shadow of the case followed him everywhere. The appellate ruling was a turning point, but it was far from the end. The legal battle would continue, and the mystery of what really happened to Meredith Kercher remained unresolved. For Amanda, Raphael, and Meredith's family, the fight for justice, whatever that might mean, was far from over. After her acquittal, Amanda Knox returned to her hometown of Seattle, hoping to leave the nightmare behind her. But freedom came with a heavy price. In Italy, prosecutors refused to let the case rest. They filed an appeal against the appellate court's decision, determined to reinstate Amanda and Raphael's convictions. The legal noose seemed to tighten once again. The Italian judicial system operates differently from that of the United States, allowing prosecutors to challenge acquittals. In 2014, the Court of Cassation overturned Amanda and Raphael's acquittal, reinstating their guilty verdicts. This development reignited the media firestorm and sent shockwaves through Amanda's life. For the first time, the possibility of extradition became a chilling reality. In the United States, debates erupted over whether Amanda should be sent back to Italy to serve her sentence. While legal experts argued about treaties and precedents, Amanda lived in constant fear of being forced to return. The uncertainty was suffocating. Every court ruling, every news headline brought fresh anxiety. Amanda spoke out publicly, pleading her case on television and in interviews. She insisted on her innocence, portraying herself as a victim of a corrupt legal system and a botched investigation. Her supporters rallied behind her, but critics saw her freedom as an affront to justice for Meredith Kercher. The prospect of extradition loomed for months, Amanda's life hanging in the balance. Would the United States government honor Italy's request, or would it protect one of its own? The tension was palpable as the world waited to see if Amanda's fight for freedom would take her back to where it all began. In 2015, Italy's Supreme Court of Cassation delivered its final ruling. Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito were definitively acquitted. The court cited a lack of evidence and profound investigative errors that had compromised the entire case. The long, grueling legal battle was finally over. The ruling marked the end of a journey that had spanned nearly 8 years. Amanda and Raphael were now legally absolved of any involvement in Meredith Kercher's death. But the questions surrounding the case persisted. Was justice truly served, or had the real culprits slipped through the cracks of a flawed investigation? Rudy Gedd remained the only person convicted in connection with Meredith's murder. His DNA was found on her body, and he had admitted to being present at the crime scene. Sentenced to 16 years in prison, Ruddy later had his sentence reduced for good behavior. He maintained that he was not solely responsible for Meredith's death, a claim that added fuel to the fire of speculation. The Supreme Court's decision brought relief to Amanda and Raphael, but left Meredith's family feeling betrayed. They had endured years of heartbreak, only to see the case end without definitive answers. For them, the acquittals felt like a failure to deliver justice for Meredith. The final ruling closed a chapter in the legal saga, but the story remained a source of controversy and debate. Did Amanda and Raphael walk free because they were innocent, or because the evidence against them was too weak to withstand scrutiny? The answer, like so much in this case, depended on who you asked. Amid the legal chaos and media frenzy, the true tragedy of the case often faded into the background: the loss of Meredith Kercher. A bright, ambitious young woman with her whole life ahead of her, Meredith had come to Perugia to study and immerse herself in Italian culture. She had dreams of becoming a journalist and making a difference in the world. Friends and family described Meredith as kind, thoughtful, and full of life. She was known for her wit and intelligence, as well as her ability to light up any room she entered. Her death was not just a personal loss to those who loved her, but a loss of potential, a future stolen in a senseless act of violence. Meredith's family worked tirelessly to preserve her memory amid the noise of the legal battles. They established scholarships in her name and spoke out about the importance of remembering her as a person, not just as a victim in a high-profile case. They wanted the world to know Meredith's story, not just the headlines that overshadowed her life. As time passed, the focus began to shift. Documentaries, books, and articles sought to honor Meredith's life while exploring the failures and controversies of the case. Her legacy became a reminder of the importance of justice and the human cost of media sensationalism. In the end, Meredith Kercher was more than the centerpiece of a global legal battle. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Her life, though tragically cut short, left an indelible mark on those who knew her and on the world that followed her story. As we reflect on the case, we must also remember Meredith not as a headline, but as the vibrant person she was. The Amanda Knox trial is more than a story of crime and justice. It is a window into the complexities and flaws of international legal systems, the influence of media, and the power of public opinion. It serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting critical missteps and systemic vulnerabilities that can derail the pursuit of justice. One of the most glaring issues was the handling of forensic evidence. From the bra clasp left at the scene for weeks to the disputed DNA on the kitchen knife, the investigation was riddled with procedural errors. Experts have pointed to these mistakes as examples of why strict adherence to protocol is essential in preserving the integrity of evidence. The case underscores the importance of training, transparency, and oversight in criminal investigations. The media's role in shaping public perception was another pivotal factor. Sensational headlines and narratives painted Amanda Knox as a villain before she had her day in court. This relentless coverage influenced not only the public, but also potentially the legal proceedings themselves. The case demonstrates the dangers of trial by media, where truth often takes a backseat to entertainment and outrage. Cultural differences also played a role. Amanda's behavior, her casual demeanor, her open personality, and her apparent lack of emotional distress clashed with Italian expectations of how someone in her position should act. These cultural misunderstandings fed into stereotypes and prejudices, further complicating the quest for impartiality. Finally, the trial highlighted the challenges of international cases where differing legal systems, languages, and cultural norms collide. Amanda's case raised questions about how suspects should be treated abroad and how justice can be pursued fairly when national interests and public scrutiny are at play. The Amanda Knox trial teaches us that justice is fragile. It is built on a foundation of fairness, evidence, and integrity, and when any of these elements are compromised, the consequences can be devastating not just for the accused, but for the victims and their families as well. Even years after the final verdict, the Amanda Knox case continues to captivate and divide public opinion. For some, Amanda and Raphael's exoneration represents a triumph of justice over a flawed system. For others, the acquittal leaves lingering doubts as unanswered questions about that night persist. The case remains one of the most polarizing in modern history, sparking debates about guilt, innocence, and the true definition of justice. Was this a story of two young people wrongfully accused, or a miscarriage of justice that allowed the guilty to go free? The conflicting narratives ensure that the case is far from forgotten. Media coverage and public fascination have kept the story alive, with documentaries, books, and interviews revisiting the events from every angle. These retellings often reflect the biases of their creators, offering new interpretations but seldom resolving the core mysteries. The absence of definitive answers leaves room for speculation, ensuring the case remains a subject of intrigue and controversy. For Meredith Kercher's family, the case is a source of enduring pain. While the legal battles are over, their search for understanding and justice continues. Meredith's memory is a reminder of the human cost of this tragedy, a young woman with a bright future lost in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. The Amanda Knox case challenges us to reflect on our own beliefs about justice, fairness, and truth. It invites us to question the narratives we accept and the systems we trust. Most importantly, it serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice is as complex as the human stories it seeks to resolve. As viewers, we are left with the ultimate question: did justice prevail, or were critical errors made? The answer lies in how we interpret the evidence, the media, and the legacy of one of the most infamous cases of our time.